Welcome to my channel. Sit back and listen to the best true crime stories. Let's go. Columbine. The coming of dead idols, or why mass murders are on the rise, what people worship. Statues of multi-armed elephants and stone women. Body parts and articles of clothing of long-dead people. Anything can become a fetish. Any living creature can become an idol. Elevate a person to the rank of saint or worthy of imitation. People can literally in an empty place. It is enough for someone to guess that tomorrow it will rain. For another, to sing a song. And you can take a rifle and, going to school, shoot a few dozen people there. You say a killer can't be an idol. Alas, he can. In 1999, two 18-year-olds managed to make human history with their terrible act. After killing 13 people, wounding 23, and then shooting themselves, they became cult heroes for millions of people. Many people still cannot understand the phenomenon of such fame. Experts believe that the media and the myths created by them are to blame. It was they who turned one of the school mass jokes into a manual for murder, inspiring thousands of other criminals. April 2021 marks the 22nd anniversary of the Columbine High School massacre. Since then, there have been at least 100 shootings around the world inspired by the incident. One of them was staged by a 15-year-old in Ivantivka near Moscow on September 5, 2017. The Kerch shooter, who killed 20 people and injured 67 on October 17, 2018, also emulated the Columbine shooters. As a result of these attacks, according to the most modest estimates, about 500 people were killed and 700 injured. Gutenberg Gymnasium, Albertville Real School, Synagogi University, Alexis de Tocqueville School. You probably don't know the names of these schools, but typing them into your browser search bar, you'll immediately understand. These are the sites of mass shootings inspired by the story at Columbine High School. University of Virginia, Umpqua College, Sandy Hook, and Stoneman Douglas High School. The list could go on for a long time. You can find many articles about each of these offenses on the internet. But about Columbine School, you will find references many times more often. The reason for this is a myth, stable and strong as the boulders of Stonehenge. The myth that motive matters in these types of pranks. That the killer is bound to be understood. And that myth was created by the media, which in the days after the Columbine High School massacre sought an answer. Why was such unimaginable violence possible? Newspapers thought they had found it at the time, and years later many of them apologized for the fact that that answer was, in fact, a huge mistake. For covering the Columbine High School killings in such a way that it became not a prevention of subsequent crimes, but a call to repeat them. Years ago, I helped fuel that myth, and now I don't know if we can destroy it. John Ingold, a reporter for the Colorado Sun who once wrote dozens of articles about the Columbine massacre, said in April 2019, "I witnessed the Littleton incident and wrote extensively about it. And by 2009, I realized I was actually complicit in it." Dave Cullen, a prominent American journalist for the Daily Beast and Vanity Fair, admitted, "I so regret being a part of it," lamented in Trujillo, a journalist with KMGH-TV news outlet. Such regrets abound these days, except that their effect is similar to the apology of a man who stabbed a passerby in the back. What good are tearful apologies if the deed is done and the journalist's pursuit of sensation has turned into instructions for more effective mass shootings? 22 years ago, Americans could only get the breaking news that two teenagers, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, had committed a massacre at a school in Littleton, Colorado, from TV and radio. Smartphones had already been invented, but few people owned them. The internet had also appeared, but it wasn't the same as it is today. To find out what was happening in your country and the world, you had to watch TV channels and listen to radio broadcasts. The news could also come with a landline phone call from a relative or friend. But these were rumors, and they were still confirmed by the official media, which in those days were treated with more trust than in our time of post-truth. When the first information about the incident at Columbine High School began to leak out, none of the journalists knew how to cover it. No, pranks had happened before. One of them occurred a year before this incident. On May 21, 1998, in Springfield, Oregon, a teenager, after killing his parents and taking 2 hunting knives, a rifle and a handgun, which he hid under a long coat, went to school with the sole purpose of killing as many people as possible. But despite firing 50 shots, he wounded 37 people and killed only 2. All the school massacres that happened before Columbine were much the same. Lone killer, short in time, impulsive and poorly organized. Columbine was different. There were 2 shooters, and they were well prepared. At the same time, the media had no established tactics for covering massacres, so they did what they usually do. They started to spin the case as much as they could, spicing up the reports with their own conclusions. The first reports of what was happening at Columbine High School, where 1,945 children attended and 140 adults worked, naturally centered on the question, what is going on there? Crowds of reporters began to converge on the scene, and a campground was set up in a park near the school. Dozens of helicopters were flying in the sky above Littleton, and roaring police, fire, and ambulance cars were converging on the scene. The sense of utter chaos was complemented by the screaming fire alarm at the school. No one knew why it went off, but its howling sounded as if the city was under air attack. Soon the reports about the incident in the provincial town were broadcast live, allowing people from all over the world to watch, among other things, the mistakes of law enforcement agencies. In 1999, they, as well as journalists, poorly understood the motives and goals of the mass murderers. They equated them with terrorists who took people hostage. The instructions of law enforcers prescribed that such actions should be responded to in a specific way: to organize an armed cordon around the building to prevent the criminals from escaping, to start negotiations, and to stall for time. But the Columbinians did not demand anything, and were not going to participate in negotiations. The stalling by the police was only to their advantage. No one attacked the school building or tried to enter it, so the killers took their time walking around the school and shooting live targets. One of the girl students was on the phone with her mom when the shooting started. "Mom, there's a shooter here. Get me out of here," she whispered tearfully, before she could hide in the school bathroom. Other children barricaded themselves in classrooms and asked each other the question, "Are we going to die?" while crying silently and rubbing tears in their fists. Meanwhile, the police had no way of knowing what was going on at Columbine. Students and teachers who called 911 and escaped gave conflicting accounts. They told of bombs exploding, handguns, hand grenades, shotguns, and semi-automatic rifles used by the killers. There was talk of 17 hostages. There was talk of a sniper on the roof and the smell of gas. And the number of shooters and what they looked like kept changing. First, witnesses spoke of 2, then 4, then 6 and 8 men, some wearing black raincoats, others black jeans, white t-shirts, and baseball caps. The bandits are wearing bulletproof vests, with holsters on their belts. They're in the cafeteria now. No, the library. They're always walking the halls, moving all over the school. One of them has already escaped. The killers are being controlled by someone outside the school. It was impossible to draw any reliable conclusions from the victims' words. Someone called the police and reported that right now there was a second massacre in town, either at the Littleton Mall or in one of its parking lots. Sheriff's deputies had to be dispatched there and recorded the false call. TV helicopters continued to circle the scene of the incident. Their aerial footage helped them see the roof and the area surrounding the school. But there were fears that the live footage could be seen by the gunmen and used for their own purposes. Parents and relatives of nearly 2,000 children began arriving at the school. Many of them were panicked, terrified, and agitated. They all had to be gathered somewhere, some to be reunited with the rescued children, others to be restrained from indiscretions, and to try to reassure them in some way. As the incident grew larger, it was decided to evacuate people from homes near the school. The work of law enforcement, rescue services, and special forces was further complicated by communication problems. Each of the 46 structures involved in the incident had their own radio systems and channels, often incompatible with each other. This was inconvenient and made communication difficult. Criminals fired periodically from windows. Police officers fired back. About 15 to 20 high school students hid behind cars in the parking lot. Some of them were seriously wounded and bleeding. Their comrades in distress were pulling off their shirts, tearing them into shreds, and trying to bandage their wounds. The children could not get out of their hiding place and run away. The killers were shooting into the parking lot. At the same time, explosions sounded periodically in the school building. They made the glass retract inside, and in the next second it was bent outward, shattering into millions of shards. There was such a rumble that the man screaming at full power couldn't hear his own voice. The paramedics, who normally don't get in front of bullets but wait for law enforcement to clear the scene, didn't want to waste a minute. There were wounded children lying on the paths and grass of the schoolyard. Every second counted. They could have been saved. The paramedics tried to pull the children to safety, but came under heavy fire from the killers who were shooting from the windows. The police began to cover the rescuers with return fire, but suddenly it stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The gunshots outside stopped. The killers went deep into the school and disappeared. Only the fire alarm screamed, drowning out the screams and groans of the victims. The SWAT team went to the school building, where they would end up having to spend many hours inspecting each of the 75 classrooms, each of the 23,226 square meters of the building. The SWAT team for the Columbine High operation was set up specifically, in a matter of minutes. It consisted of 12 SWAT officers from 3 different agencies. Many of the participants were unfamiliar with each other. Most lacked tactical gear and weapons. There was no body armor and only 2 protective shields. 3 officers had the day off on the day of the incident, but rushed to Littleton as soon as they heard what was happening, volunteering to join the team. Vincent D. Mann, the Denver Police Department SWAT commander, had a son attending Columbine whose fate he knew nothing about. Complicating matters was the lack of a plan for the renovated school 4 years ago. It was hand-drawn from the students' words. That's how the 12-member Columbine Special Forces rushed into battle with almost no equipment, practically bare hands, an artisanal map, and contradictory information about the killers. Help would not come to them soon enough, in about an hour. Split into 2 groups, wading ankle-deep in water poured by fire sprinklers, blinded by smoke and stunned by the howling siren. The 12 brave men did not know how many criminals were in the building or what they looked like, where they were, or if they had any hostages, or if there was a sniper lurking somewhere on the roof, ready to shoot to kill. Many closed or barricaded doors had to be forced open. Behind each of them could be an explosive device, potential victims, suspects, or hostages. The smoke made it hard to see. The siren wail made it hard to hear. The school cafeteria looked like a massacre. Bullet-riddled walls, shrapnel on the floor, ceiling tiles dangling at odd angles, wires dislodged, furniture blackened by fire, and hundreds of abandoned trays of leftover food, and about 400 or so backpacks, each of which had to be inspected for bombs. The victims found were initially hard to convince to leave their hiding places. They were terrified of any man in black. They were searched and questioned, fearing that the killers might blend in with the crowd and go beyond the cordon. The wounded were found, carried outside. Dead children had their eyes closed, sending the worst curses to the gunmen, carefully avoiding unexploded bombs. Groups of children were taken out of the school. At one point, a KMGH-TV camera crew from a helicopter began broadcasting live footage of SWAT officers helping a wounded 17-year-old Patrick Ireland escape from the school. With 3 bullets in his body, bleeding and occasionally losing consciousness, he barely made it to the library window, the floor of which was strewn with dead and wounded classmates. Then he couldn't get his heavy, unruly body over the frame. He was ready to fall from the 2nd floor onto the concrete sidewalk, believing that this way he had a better chance of survival than if he stayed in school. He didn't know that Harris and Klebold were already dead. Two FBI SWAT team members drove an armored car under the windows and climbed on top of it, but not in time to pick up the injured boy, who fell onto the roof of the car from a height of more than 2 meters. The library was the last room investigated by the Special Forces. By about 4:30 in the afternoon, it was there that the dead bodies of the shooters were found, lying on the floor in a pool of their own blood with their heads shot through. Nearby, the murder weapons on the table, a burst Molotov cocktail, and a small fire. There weren't 6 or 8 of them, just 2. Skinny and angular, they looked like ordinary teenagers. Looking at them, it was unbelievable that these essentially still children could have caused so much trouble and terror. It was only then that the fire alarms were turned off and a heavy silence fell over the town. No one cried. It was as if everyone was numb. Empty stares, the lost ability to feel anything and realize their losses. For several hours, Littleton would be besieged by post-traumatic silence. Tears and screams would not break through this wall of silence immediately. Bomb squads and SWAT teams will search the school until 12 a.m. They will find many unexploded bombs in the building, on school grounds, and in vehicles in student parking lots. Will realize that the killers had with them several firearms, knives, Molotov. During the attack, Harris fired 96 rounds from a carbine and 25 from a sawed-off shotgun. Klebold fired 55 rounds from a pistol and 12 from a double-barreled shotgun. Law enforcement fired 141 rounds during the shootout with them. 2 bombs planted by the Columbinians in the school cafeteria fortunately did not explode. Otherwise, they could have killed all 488 people eating lunch at that time. To make matters worse, the school library was located on the 2nd floor just above the cafeteria. The blast would have collapsed the ceiling, destroying the supports holding it up, killing the people in the reading rooms as well. The sniper on the roof would also be found. He would turn out to be an employee who had come to repair the school's air conditioning system. He barricaded himself on the roof during the attack and waited to be rescued. Night will finally fall on Littleton, heavy, and oppressive. No one will sleep a wink trying to figure out what happened. And no one, of course, will know that what really happened on April 20th, 1999, at Columbine High School was not another prank, but a door open to a world of viral violence. As the bleak morning progressed, details of the incident would begin to leak to the press, revealing a picture full of horror and pain. Uncontrollable madness. Shots in the faces of classmates and in the backs of fleeing children, finishing off the wounded begging for mercy. Unmotivated brutality. The laughter of the killers, drowned out by the sounds of gunfire and the moans of the victims. Horrific violence for which there was no reason. 12 children and 1 teacher shot on the spot, each shot multiple times. Dozens of children with serious injuries are in the hospital, and it is unknown if they will all survive. Amid this information, Americans rallied. Thousands of people and companies from around the country sent money and came to personally help. They paid for medical treatment and funerals, were willing to sit by the bedsides of the wounded, and cleared debris at the school. Volunteers organized funds and fundraisers. Lawyers provided free services to the families of the victims. Meanwhile, journalists tried to understand the killers and their motives. Colorado's largest publication, the Denver Post, published articles about the Columbine High School massacre every day for months. Other publications and outlets kept up, trying to learn any details they could about the shooters' lives. According to the media, even minor details mattered and could explain the motives behind the mass murder. So the newspapers were peppered with provocative headlines and screaming speculation. The Columbine shooters wore long black coats and blogged, so they were either part of the school's trenchcoat mafia community or were outcasts. One Denver publication, the Rocky Mountain News, called the Columbiners quiet loners with a reputation as outsiders. Did any of the high school survivors say the killers didn't like athletes? The Columbiners probably wanted revenge on athletes. A sinister cult of sports flourished at Columbine, read a Washington Post headline. One of the high school girls Klebold asked during the attack if she believed in God. She said yes and was shot? So the killers were Satanists, or conversely, religious fanatics. All these early conclusions about motives were premature and erroneous, forming the reader's opinion. The perpetrators were taking revenge on someone. No, the journalists did not dance on the bones of the dead, for no one enjoys describing grief and pain. By choosing screaming headlines and making scandalous assumptions, they wanted to color their content with sharp emotions. To shock the reader, because only extreme feelings can really resonate with people's souls. As some of the reporters would later tell us, by describing such shocking details of the crime, we wanted to motivate the readers. We saw ourselves as a force for good. Realizing their own importance, journalists titled their articles ominously, "Death is coming to our schools with a cold, evil laugh." How could such a headline leave anyone indifferent? As Americans sent their children to school in the morning, they shuddered with horror. They wanted to find out who was responsible for their fears. And after a while, they began to believe that the Columbiners could have been stopped. But someone had overlooked it all, and now the guilty party must be found and punished in such a way that no one would ever be punished again. And the newspapers added more details to the story, continuing to describe the consequences of the tragedy. Two boys, one of whom was shot in the face and the other in the heart, had to undergo 6 painful and expensive surgeries. 5 other children with head and spine wounds remained permanently confined to a wheelchair. Their families struggled to cope with the new reality, the realization that their newly buoyant children now required constant care. Carla Hochhalter, the mother of a 17-year-old girl who was shot in the spine during the attack and is now completely paralyzed, couldn't come to terms with her grief. 6 months after the Columbine massacre, Carla walked into a gun store and asked to be shown the revolvers. After picking one up, she waited until the clerk turned away, loaded the .38 caliber revolver with 2 bullets she had brought with her, and shot herself. In the other families of the murdered and wounded children, the situation was no better. Some parents could not cope with the loss and no longer wanted to live. Others were losing their minds. Even the 12 Special Forces soldiers who were the first to enter the blood-soaked school needed psychological help. Some of them suffered nightmares, were afraid to let their children go to school, and did not want to return to duty. Half of the town needed psychological help, and soon the therapists themselves began to need the same help. No one could absorb so much grief and pain. These horrors had to be explained by something, and the main version was revenge. Allegedly, the Columbine killers had been bullied and ridiculed for so long that they finally couldn't stand it and decided to destroy their abusers. At the same time, many people believe that if they had not had access to guns, the massacre would not have happened. Others argued vehemently that it was a matter of bad upbringing. Still others blamed the violence on television and the internet. Some even blamed Marilyn Manson, whose music the killers listened to. Every day the TV channels invited experts of all stripes, and those with a smart look said that they knew exactly why such incidents happened. Psychologists sounded especially authoritative. Without arguing their words with anything, they said, "Today's youth is promiscuous and complacent. They are prone to cruelty and violence, all because they are brought up on the principle of freedom of personality, information, and desires. That's the way it used to be. When we were growing up, this never happened. Only strict discipline and correct moral values will keep our society away from such dramas." Invited politicians and officials added to these conclusions the necessity to bring up children according to the canons of religion, and, of course, convinced that guns are evil and access to them should be seriously restricted. When I become a mayor judge deputy, I will definitely save you all from this scourge. Listening to all this, viewers were unaware that in fact, in the programs devoted to the Columbine massacre, journalists and the experts they invited were not looking for answers to the question, but were mostly promoting their own interests. The TV stations were fighting for the audience and the title of biggest news outlet. All methods were good in this battle. The more egregious the expert sounded, the better. The more interviews with him were referenced by other publications, the faster the ratings and popularity of the TV channel and the journalists working there grew. Speakers talking about modern youth, raise their recognizability, and earn money from the books they published. And politicians remained politicians. There was never any truth in their words. The main thing is to promise something to the voters now, and then we will figure it out. This is how slowly but surely the idea was introduced into society. Mass murderers must be understood. They are the victims from the beginning. They were brought up wrong. They were not properly valued in school. Society, their parents, classmates, and social services are to blame for their eventual snapping. And also those who sold them guns, wrong music and video content, computer games, psychotropic drugs, factories that produce black coats, neighbors who do not keep a good eye on those who live near them, social services, police, religion, wrong weather, and in general everything and anything that could somehow influence the thoughts of the average American teenager. Television and the experts it invites do the same thing until today. Their principle of work has not changed much over the last 20 years. The main thing is hype, ratings, and money. Consequences are not important. If TV viewers are not able to understand what nonsense they are fed, it is their problem. But at the same time, while the adult population of America was trying to recover from the shock, teenagers reacted to the incident in a very different way. The children who became direct participants in the mass murder quickly came to their senses. Chuck Green, a Denver Post columnist, wrote about this phenomenon in September 1999. Have you noticed the same thing I have? Teenagers who survived the horror at Columbine High School seem to be coping with the psychological trauma far better than adults who watched the massacre from the sidelines. Perhaps there is something in the younger generation that will make for a better future than the reality they inherited from us. When a school prank took place in 2017 in Ivantivka, near Moscow, the children of the younger grades who witnessed the incident also behaved very calmly. At ease and with pleasure, they communicated with journalists. They happily told the details of the attack and said, "I am a star now. I wonder how much I will be paid for participation in the program. Let them talk." When reading that the children who survived Columbine did not suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, many wanted to believe that the new generation might have grown up immune to severe shocks. But reality, unfortunately, demonstrated something different and, at the time, little understood. First, 8 days after the shooting, on April 28, 1999, a 14-year-old Canadian teenager, having seen enough coverage of Columbine, put on a black raincoat, picked up a semi-automatic rifle and went to W.R.R. High School, R. Myers High School in Taber, Alberta, Canada. He opened fire in the hallway and school cafeteria, eventually killing one child and wounding another. One of the teachers disarmed him, and the police soon arrived. In America, the same thing happened. First, a few days after the return of children to Columbine School, teachers began to find on the walls of its toilets painted swastikas and the inscription 420, a hint of the day of the massacre. Painted on the walls were the same teenagers who a few weeks ago ran out of the school screaming in terror. Maybe it's the kids' way of coping with stress, the teachers thought, washed the writing off the walls and waited for it to stop. But then 5 of the 17 schools in Littleton and its district received anonymous threats with blackmail and the words, "Columbine is just the beginning." In May 1999, the next school shooting took place at a high school in Conyers Township, Georgia. A teenager opened fire, injuring 6 students. This happened on the day when American President Bill Clinton delivered a message to the survivors of Columbine and called on the country to begin the healing process. And in September of the same year, the massacre also took place in the large Texas city of Fort Worth. The perpetrator entered a Baptist church when there was a youth prayer meeting and first detonated an improvised explosive device and then opened fire with 2 guns, killing 7 people and wounding 7 others. That's when the realization came to everyone. It doesn't end. Threats and swastikas are not childish pranks or an attempt to cope with stress. There is something else here, something deeper and scarier. The Columbine tragedy became such a popular topic in society that it overshadowed all other events. A study by the American analytical company Pew Research Center, conducted in December 1999, showed that 68% of the U.S. population was interested in the April incident in Littleton. It ranked first in the top 10 domestic and foreign events. 7 out of 10 Americans said they followed information about the Columbine shooting very closely. Interest was especially high among people under 30, who tend not to be interested in the news. Not even the sexual escapades and impeachment trial of President Bill Clinton interested Americans as much as the school massacre. While the public listened with violent rapture to news of the Columbine incident, the parents of the victims were horrified. Newspapers published front-page photos of the corpses of their shot children. Magazines and television stories were full of images of the killers, details of their lives and hobbies. Time magazine even put portraits of the Columbinians on its cover. The media gave the militants exactly what they wanted: fame. For other would-be assassins, it was like a carrot for a donkey. The motive, the call to action: if you do the same, you will get national attention. The parents of the affected children understood the enormous fallacy of such actions, but the newspapermen did not. Nor did the praised psychologists, who continue to work for themselves, as before, and not for society, realize it. Virtually none of them tried to stop the glorification of murderers. Careers were built on the names of the Columbine murderers. They were used to publicize themselves and make money. Nobody cared about the consequences. The main thing was to express their invaluable opinion, as if the world could not do without it. Revenge is not a motive for mass murder. But while some experts jumped on TV channels and broadcast with a meaningful look, real scientists worked. Those who are truly talented by nature have no time to talk. Talking doesn't change anything. It gets in the way and takes up valuable time. That's probably how criminal psychologist Peter Lehman thought back then. Or maybe he didn't even think about it, but just worked on studying teenagers who survived the school massacres they planned or carried out. At the time, Lehman worked at a psychiatric hospital for children and adolescents, specialized in studying their desire to kill. He studied behavior, looking for common patterns, trying to find abnormalities in physical and mental development. In the late 90s and early 20s, little was known about the psychology of mass murderers and school killers in particular. Lehman would devote his life to studying just such criminals. His file cabinet will contain about 200 cases, and for each of the perpetrators he will collect a complete dossier, from documents and evidence relating to their childhood, to the results of medical examinations, transcripts of conversations with the killers, their blog posts, and police records. But most importantly, he will find one of the most important patterns, the tendency of mass murderers to mimic. Lehman will discover that virtually all such criminals are inspired by earlier identical massacres. You have no idea how much each of the teens who plan or commit mass murder study information about similar incidents, explains Langman. Often they literally idolize other militants, quote them all the time, dress like them, and feel that they are somehow mentally connected to them. When I observed this each time, I wondered, would they have committed their crime if they didn't have a role model? And yes, it's safe to say that no one has inspired more followers than the Columbine criminals. Langman also found that virtually all mass murderers consider themselves special and found a unifying motive. Violence is a way for them to go from being nobody to somebody. Many of these killers have a sense of helplessness from early childhood. They don't know how and don't want to obey the laws and rules of society. They refuse to follow them, and when they are punished for it, they become embittered and start wanting to kill. Langman and several other practicing psychiatrists played one of the most important roles in researching the Columbine High School massacre phenomenon. A group of these real, not imaginary, experts helped the FBI get to the bottom of the incident and, most importantly, albeit overcoming resistance, began to change the way the media and society approach such tragedies. In 1999 to 2000, most Americans, having heard the unprofessional opinions of journalists and amateur psychologists, came to one of two wrong conclusions. The first was that the pair of teenagers who carried out the Columbine massacre were high school outcasts who had been bullied. Their crime was a radical response to bullying, which means they were the victims in the first place. Their parents, teachers, and classmates are to blame for the boy's snapping. This option, as you might imagine, assumed that eliminating all of these factors would guarantee the prevention of future school massacres. The second incorrect theory was that the Columbine boys were not victims. They're scumbags, sick in the head. You can't get into their brains. You can't understand them. We'll never be able to figure out how to prevent this kind of violence. And if the first option was chosen by optimists and people inclined to look for simple solutions to complex problems, the second option was preferred by pessimists and those who did not look for answers at all. But after about 5 years of studying the Columbine story, the FBI and the scientific team working with him dispelled both myths. Their explanation sounded reassuring on one hand and disturbing on the other. The first step toward understanding what happened at Columbine High School, according to the experts, was to abandon the revenge motive. As it turns out, no one was poisoning the Columbine students. They were not outcasts at the school, and they were not feuding with anyone. They were the ones who broke every conceivable rule, picked on younger kids, dressed provocatively, teased girls, and liked to make racist jokes. By now you're probably wondering, how many articles and movies have been written about how school shooters are always victims of bullying, and their main motive is revenge? This myth has long been debunked by experts and law enforcement officials, but it has become so ingrained in the public consciousness that no one knows how to weed it out. Every time there is a massacre in some country, there are people looking for evidence that the killer was abused by someone at school, college, university work. They find a couple of stories and begin to explain the killer's bitterness by this. In reality, researchers who study the history of such criminals, in most cases, find that the perpetrator was subjected to bullying no more and no less than everyone else. Except that if his classmates either defended themselves or tolerated, the future mass murderer gradually accumulated anger in himself and prepared for reprisal. Thus, any hardships in life for him became only an occasion, not the root cause. Illustration of the above. 1. In the spring of 2014, in the small town of Waseca, Minnesota, on a tip from a vigilant neighbor, police disarmed 17-year-old John Ledoux, who was preparing a Columbine-style school massacre. The teen was apprehended in a shed surrounded by Molotov cocktails and homemade pressure cooker bombs. He surrendered calmly, without a fight, after which he began to cooperate with the investigation, answering any police questions with an impassive face. The guy planned to detonate the bombs when his sister was at school, so he was going to kill her too. But before the attack, he wanted to kill his parents first. When asked by the investigator, "Why did you want to kill your family? Did they do something to you?" Ledoux calmly replied, "No, they didn't do anything. I just wanted to kill as many people as possible." Ledoux really wasn't hurt by anyone at home or at school. He grew up in a wonderful family where love and affluence were taken for granted. As a child, he went to clubs and sections, collected stamps, made friends with kids, played guitar. He was close to his sister, father, and mother. Always poorly expressed his emotions, but grew up a completely problem-free child who trusted friends and parents. At some point, however, a desire to kill began to brew in the teenager's mind. There was no clear reason or trigger that led me to this thought. It was more of a gradual development of a feeling that I didn't like everything. It pissed me off that the German teacher knew the language better than me. Mozart started writing music at the age of 5, and there was no way I could ever really master playing the guitar. I looked at other people. They lived, they were happy, they were satisfied with themselves and the world, and I was not satisfied. They didn't see me as a god, a special person, and I wasn't living. I existed, and it just kept building up. I wanted to dominate others, humiliate them. I liked to imagine their eyes staring into the muzzle of a gun. I knew this is what I would enjoy. My idol is Eric Harris. I see myself in him. Ledoux would later be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and narcissistic personality disorder with signs of OCD. He would not be put behind bars, but would be sent to a psychiatrist for treatment. Later, he seems to be fully socialized, graduates from college, and, according to him, stops feeling the urge to dominate and hurt someone. 2. Another example is 16-year-old Kip Kinkle, who on May 21, 1998, killed his parents and went on a shooting rampage at Thurston High School that left 2 of his classmates dead and 25 injured. Kip Kinkle grew up in a wonderful, loving family of well-known educators. Parents and sister Kip loved, practiced foreign languages together, went on hikes, had family parties. But the boy from early childhood strangely behaved. He studied hard, getting high marks in many subjects, but for some reason he learned reading and writing with difficulty. Later it became clear that he had dyslexia. At the age of 10, he became interested in firearms and cold weapons, as well as explosives. His father was initially perplexed by such interests of his son, but in order to guide him in the right direction, enrolled him in self-defense courses. By 7th grade, Kinkle had changed a lot. Many classmates began to fear him, calling him nothing but schizoid. The teenager liked to tell emotionally that he would like to join the U.S. Army to find out what it was like to kill people. He started ordering books on the internet about bomb making. I got caught stealing for the first time and secretly bought my first weapon, an old sawed-off shotgun. After a trip to Disneyland, he talked about the only emotion the park evoked, the desire to beat up Mickey Mouse. He started making mean jokes about girls and built stink bombs, exploding in the lockers of his classmates. In the 8th grade, the police caught him throwing stones at passing cars. After that prank, his parents took Kip to anger management classes. A psychiatrist examined the teenager and found no thought disorder or psychosis. But he diagnosed Kip with a depressive disorder and concluded that the boy has difficulty in school because he cannot manage his anger. He was prescribed antidepressants, but the treatment had no effect. The teenager beat up classmates, began to raise his hand against his parents, and believed that the U.S. government had implanted a surveillance chip in his head. Shortly before his death, Kip's father, Bill Kinkle, confessed to a friend that he was afraid of his son and had exhausted methods of helping him. Just days later, Kip shot his father in the back of the head in the kitchen of his own home. And then he stalked his mother in the garage, shot her twice in the back of the head, 3 times in the face and once in the heart. He then taped 1.22 caliber bullet and 1.9 caliber bullet to his chest so he could shoot himself if he ran out of ammunition. He planted 2 homemade bombs in the house, put on a long black coat under which he hid the weapon, and went to the school, where he killed 2 people and wounded 25. He was neutralized by the school children, knocking him to the floor and taking away his weapon. The court convicted Kip Kinkle of 58 crimes and sent him to prison for 111 years. Kip Kinkle, the teenager who killed his parents, 2 school children, and injured 25 people. He looks pathetic next to police officers. 3. Mikhail Pivnyov, 15, who tried to organize a school massacre in Ivantivka near Moscow on September 5, 2017. Also grew up in a well-to-do family. His parents loved and patronized him, made sure that the boy did not wander idly on the street. But at the age of 12, the boy became interested in the history of Columbine. He was calm, did not clash with his classmates, but started coming to school in a black raincoat and boots, carried a military-style bag, was a fan of weapons, wanted to be like the Columbiners, and said strange things. He published photos of Harris and Klebold on social networks, bought clothes of the same models and brands as them, and appeared in V-Contact under the surname Klebold. Because of this, his classmates began to consider him a strange guy with a ghost, laughed behind the eyes, but did not perceive him as dangerous. No one paid no attention to all his threats, considering them a joke, because the teenager had no reason to get angry. The second step, according to the investigating committee, was to recognize that the Columbine High School incident was seriously different from other similar stories. As the investigation found out, what made this massacre different from previous ones was, first of all, the detailed planning. Whereas before the school shooters acted mostly impulsively, the Columbine shooters planned their attack coldly, calculatingly, and for almost a year. The Columbine school massacre was perceived by the Columbinians as a kind of launching pad for a grander goal, the murder of several thousand people, and the terrorizing of the entire nation. They wanted to do something so devastating and catastrophic that the entire country would shudder at its consequences. They had no grudges against their classmates and teachers. It was just that they considered these targets to be easy prey. So they decided to start with the school. In their conversations and notes, they mocked the low efficiency of previous mass shootings. And they were deadly serious about surpassing the result of the Oklahoma City massacre. They originally planned their attack on the school on the anniversary of that attack, April 19th. For reference, on April 19th, 1995 in Oklahoma City, near one of the administrative buildings exploded a car filled with explosives. The terrorist attack killed 168 people, including 19 children under the age of 6, and injured 680. The explosion almost completely destroyed 24 buildings and damaged about 300 more. The blast wave spread over 16 blocks, blowing out the windows of houses within a radius of 4.5 kilometers. The attack was carried out by Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, members of a far-right group who decided to avenge the Waco siege and the events at Ruby Ridge. Experts now call these kinds of violent acts mass ideological assassinations. That the Columbinians planned with the school only to begin a history of violence, they said themselves. In one of the recorded videos, they called themselves rebels, called the upcoming action a revolution, and expressed a desire to kill the largest number of people in U.S. history. For the record, over the course of a year, the Columbiners, using instructions from the internet, constructed 99 explosive devices themselves: pipe bombs, propane bombs, and bombs in empty carbon dioxide tanks. They gave many of their bombs names, such as Revenge and Atlanta. It was planned that the 2 bombs placed in the school cafeteria would explode at a certain time, killing several hundred people, and the survivors would be killed in the street. The next stage was to blow up cars left in the school parking lot and filled with explosives. By then, according to the Columbinians, rescue workers and reporters would have arrived at the school. So this explosion would have killed most of them, and it would have happened live on TV. But the Columbine people didn't know physics and math very well. The 2 propane bombs in the mess hall failed because the detonators didn't work. In fact, only 32 of the 99 improvised explosive devices detonated. In one video, Klebold predicted that his and Harris's criminal duo would have many followers. The filmmakers are going to fight for our story. I know we're going to have followers, because we're godlike. We're not quite human. We have human bodies, but we're a few notches above the rest of freaking humanity. As summarized by the FBI and criminalists, the Columbinians wanted not just to be famous, but above all, to cause fear in as many people as possible. That said, the psychological state of Klebold and Harris could not be equated. They were very different. Unity of Opposites University of Michigan psychiatrist Dr. Frank Ochberg, lead FBI investigator of the Columbine High School incident Dwayne Fuselier, and clinical psychologists Peter Langman and Robert Hare described the Columbine men as radically different people. Dylan Klebold, about 3 years before the incident, began to show signs of schizoaffective disorder, a mental condition that combines features of schizophrenia and affective disorder. This disorder is difficult to diagnose, as it is not accompanied by personality changes. However, it leads to distortion of thinking and perception of reality. It is likely that by 1999, this condition of Klebold's, generously laced with his friendship with Eric Harris, had developed to the point where a school shooting seemed like a reasonable action for him to take. Dylan was born September 11, 1981, in a prosperous family of Thomas and Sue Klebold. He was a favorite child, but from early childhood was characterized by a fiery temper. Poorly coped with difficulties, easily gave up and did not bring things to the end. Experienced great difficulty in communicating with girls, considered himself unworthy of love ugly. In adolescence suffered from depression and in his diaries wrote about suicide. Often found himself in a depressed state, had romanticized ideas about reality. Tended to blame himself rather than others for many problems. Sue Klebold, Dylan's mother, after her son's death, explained to psychiatrists that she saw her child shut down and suffer, but was sure this is what happens to most teenagers. The formation of personality, expression, search for self, maximalist attitude to life, and childhood disappointments in the imperfection of the world. In short, everything that many teenagers go through. Later, she blamed herself for not fully realizing the suffering her son was going through. Peter Lehman met Sue Klebold, and his conversation with her struck him. The woman was incredibly anguished, wondering, where did I go wrong in raising Dylan? She told him that she named him after the Welsh poet and playwright Dylan Thomas. Together with her husband, she raised him and another son, Byron, in love and affection. The boys were not deprived of care or attention. Money in the family is not that there was a huge amount, but they were enough for everything. Langman tried to reassure her by telling her about families in which children had committed suicide not because their parents treated them badly, but in spite of how much they loved them. Sue Klebold couldn't understand that. Like most mothers, she thought love and normal parenting couldn't produce a monster. So how come her son hated the world, went out to kill children, and then shot himself in the head? Eric Harris. Things were quite different with Harris. Prior to the attack, he had been treated with heavy antidepressants for his anger management problems. But these treatments, of course, did nothing. Harris had antisocial personality disorder, or in terms now abandoned in the scientific community, sociopathy, characterized by pathologically gross and persistent disregard for social norms, lack of empathy, aggressiveness, inability to plan and form attachments, completed evaluation of the needs and desires of others, an inability to feel guilt and to benefit from life experiences even when punishment follows, a pronounced tendency to blame others for one's misfortunes and to offer explanations for one's actions, a tendency to manipulate others, the ability to adapt to any circumstance when necessary and be what is expected of you. Eric was considered by many to be a good-looking and nice guy. He was great at mimicking any situation. At the same time, he considered himself an incarnation of God, a person different from the rest of the biomass. He was able to be sociable and correct. But in reality, he had the mind of an unfeeling sociopath who does not understand the pain of others and can experience positive emotions only from the suffering of others. That is, the main difference between Klebold and Harris was that the former felt pain himself, while the latter wanted to hurt others. Nowadays, in popular culture, almost any criminal has come to be called a psychopath or sociopath. But Harris was in the clinical sense an antisocial personality. This is not a bad upbringing, not a vile character, not just a bad or mentally ill person. It's a diagnosis, an abnormality in the functioning of the brain. A sociopath is who he is not by virtue of his own desire. It is a pathology. Also, unlike those who suffer from psychoses or neuroses, people diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder are very rational, understand and realize everything. They know the norms of society, but ignore them. They are not disoriented or disconnected from reality, nor do they experience illusions, hallucinations, or subjective stress, which are characteristic of most other mental disorders and illnesses. The presence of Harris's antisocial disorder is screamed about throughout his diaries and videos. The first sentence of the diary demonstrates this as best as possible. I hate the whole fucking world. You know what I hate.
Антрії музику.
You know what I hate. People who say everything in wrestling is real. You know what I hate. People who say the same word over and over again. You know what I hate. Stupid people. Why are so many people so stupid? You know what I hate. When people mispronounce words and don't even realize it. Learn to say it right, you morons. You know what I hate. Star Wars fans. This Columbine guy's diary is made up of phrases like that. In the portion of the videos that have been made public, both Harris and Klebold talk about hating niggers, spics, Jews, and fucking whites, calling religion the faith of the weak. Imagine how many people they could kill and how many people they could make miserable. And in the midst of all these words, An emotion far more revealing than hatred bursts through Eric. Contempt. He's not acting like a frustrated teenager at all. These are the thoughts and desires of a man with a messianic superiority complex, whose goal is to punish the entire human race for its inferiority. That is, Harris did not actually hate, but felt a literal physical need to humiliate. The second factor confirming Harris's diagnosis is his pathological mendacity, of which he himself constantly said and wrote, "I lie a lot. I lie almost constantly, and to everyone just to keep my ass out of trouble. Yeah, I quit smoking. Not really, I just try not to get caught. I could convince anyone of anything, like that I'm going to climb Everest, or that I have a twin brother growing out of my back. I could make anyone believe anything." According to psychiatrists counseling the FBI, Harris most often lied not to benefit himself, but for pleasure. Duping delight, that's the term experts call this symptom, and it is, in their opinion, one of the key features of antisocial personality disorder. Harris's mendacity was coupled with a complete lack of remorse and empathy, and an inability to infer consequences for his actions. In January 1999, Harris and Kleinbold were caught stealing property from a van. Both teens portrayed remorse very convincingly, and Harris wrote a letter of apology to the owner of the auto. He felt no remorse, and did it all with the sole purpose of getting a lesser sentence. He sent his victim an ingratiating letter of implausible apology. "God, now I understand how you feel. My act has caused you so much grief and suffering." Almost at the same time, Harris wrote in his diary his true feelings. "Is not America a free country? Why, if I'm free, can't I strip this idiot of his property? I mean, he left it in the front seat of his fucking van in full view of everyone. It's natural selection. He should be shot." Harris also had absolutely deviant fantasies about rape and mutilation, which he wrote about in his diary. Self-love, a sense of superiority, contempt for everyone, deceitfulness, and a desire to inflict pain are items on the checklist of characteristics of the classic sociopath Harris, for whom the pattern of behavior during the school attack was to shoot his classmates, laugh and mock the wounded while they writhing in pain and begging for mercy, and then fire repeated shots to finish off the victim. Curiously, because sociopaths have a different thought process than normal people, many people tend to think of them as unpredictable. In fact, it is easier to predict their behavior than that of normal people, because antisocial personalities follow strict patterns of behavior. For them, the concepts of conscience and regret, honor and remorse do not exist. They are free from social fetters and live solely by the concepts of their own benefit and desires. The difference between the motivation of behavior in sociopaths and normal people is so great that now in the intelligence services of many countries of the world, negotiators are trained to determine by a few phrases whether they are not dealing with a person with antisocial personality disorder. If the criminal demonstrates specific character traits, the negotiator must immediately change his tactics of behavior. Of course, the fact that Eric Harris had antisocial personality disorder is not a reason for his legal acquittal. People with such a diagnosis are recognized as having a criminal record. However, understanding his pathology provides insight into the motives behind his crime. The fact is that none of the victims mean anything to the sociopath. Not only does he feel no guilt for ruining their lives, but he doesn't understand why they are suffering. Emotions such as love, hate, or fear are unfamiliar to him, because he hardly feels them himself. Because of their inability to understand the feelings of others, some antisocial personalities are capable of behaviors that normal people find appalling, explains clinical psychiatrist Robert Hare. For example, they can torture and mutilate their victims while experiencing roughly the same emotions as we do when we gut a chicken. Unfortunately, fate brought the Columbine men together, and one of them, Eric Harris, became the instigator and leader, while the other, Dylan Kleinbold, accepted his rules of the game and became a violent enforcer. People with antisocial personality disorder sometimes find such suggestible individuals subjugating and directing their actions. As a result, according to police and FBI documents, Klebold was actively involved in killing people during the attack and was outwardly pleased to finish off the wounded. There is a suggestion that if the Columbine High School shooting had not happened, Klebold might have been caught sooner or later on some misdemeanor, received psychiatric help, but lived to see the present day. Harris, on the other hand, was initially finished. According to experts from the FBI's investigative team, death may have prevented him from doing something more horrific. Statistics. Mass murders are on the rise since the Columbine High School tragedy. Authorities and law enforcement agencies in the United States and around the world have gotten much smarter. Schools are now safer, and police and SWAT teams have developed ways to respond to such incidents. Immediate action, rapid deployment tactics, and active shooter protocol behavior have emerged. These guidelines no longer equate mass murderers with hostage-taking criminals. Rapid deployment involves law enforcement entering the scene of an attack as quickly as possible, better arming and tactically equipping police and special forces, and eliminating the perpetrator at the slightest threat to civilians. These tactics help shorten the attack time and eliminate the killer faster, but it has not reduced the number of tragic incidents. Alas, the Columbine tragedy is not even in the top 10 in terms of casualties to date. Worldwide statistics show a dramatic increase in the number of mass murders, and the number of people killed in such attacks breaks records every year. A significant increase in such crimes can be seen in the statistics in the United States. For several years now, the NTAC agency has been assessing them in America and periodically publishes reports on them. It should be understood that today it is the USA that is the pioneer of a comprehensive study of the problem of mass killings. The latest report published by the agency shows that while there were a total of 160 mass murder attacks in the U.S. between 2000 and 2013, there were 89 such incidents in just 2 years, from 2017 to 2019. That's practically a fourfold increase, and experts blame the media and social media for it. Why Columbinians are being imitated and how the media and social media are to blame for it over the past 21-plus years. Dozens of books have been written about the Columbine High School incident, and many movies have been made. According to search engine statistics, tens of millions of people have read information about the crime. There are forums and websites on the web where Columbinians are called heroes and role models. Police have found references and mentions of them in numerous teenagers who planned or committed school pranks. For example, in late 2017, police in Colorado Springs arrested 2 boys who had made a list of people to kill. They idolized the Columbinians, dressed like them, and wanted to be like them in everything. They were only 13 years old. How is it that people want to copy monsters? The answer is simple. Television and the internet make anyone famous, regardless of whether he does a beautiful, useful, and necessary deed or the most disgusting one. We are going more and more into digital, and many people see that it is possible to become famous only through the web. And it does not matter whether by good or bad deeds. Someone makes his own blogs, sings, dances, invents, and makes something. And a small percentage of people with antisocial personality disorder make their own conclusions. I can become famous as a criminal. This is similar to the popularity of, for example, Kim Kardashian. Her ardent admirers want to dress like Kim, look like her, use the same perfume. Antisocial personalities have different idols and motives. That's why the number of mass murders is increasing, and this trend will continue. The main thing that the Columbine story demonstrated is that they achieved their goals. Curiously enough, this is roughly how they envisioned it, and their followers already know it. One of the shooters who massacred Virginia Tech University in 2007, killing 32 people before taking his own life, called the Columbine shooters martyrs, and said his horrific vendetta will reverberate through every home and soul in America. Before shooting 10 people at Umpqua Community College in Oregon in 2015, and then taking his own life, another killer also wrote about Columbiners. And after his death, he found himself famous and celebrated thanks to the media. So many people like me are completely alone and unknown. But when they shed a little blood, the whole world knows who they are, the Oregon shooter wrote. Their faces appear on every screen. their names on the lips of just about every person on the planet, all within a single day. It seems like the more people you kill, the more you are the center of attention. Mass murders are publicized more actively than showbiz and sports star. Scientists began intensively investigating the problem of why information about mass murders goes viral in 2012 to 2013. In 2015, scientists from Arizona State University and Northeastern Illinois University published their study of 220 mass, or as they are now called, spectacular murders. This study revealed a clear pattern. Media reports of suicides and mass murders significantly increased the frequency of such incidents. Apparently, such information gives individuals with a labile psyche and antisocial personality disorder an idea of what to do. On average, this stimulation lasts about 13 days after the first incident. Such an effect was called contagion by mass murder and suicide in the study. A report by a group of other scientists published in 2016 showed a similar finding, and in it this effect was called criminal contagion. And in 2017, Adam Lankfort, a professor in the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the University of Alabama, decided to expand on this study. He compared the amount of media attention given to mass murderers and various showbiz and sports stars. In recent years, some media outlets have begun to turn mass murderers into celebrities by giving them too much attention. But it has never been tested whether the amount of attention these criminals receive is really equal to the amount of attention received by showbiz and sports stars. In this study, I compared data on 7 mass murderers between 2013 and 2017 with data on more than 600 celebrities during the same period. The results showed